Welcome, everybody. This is Patrick Snow, host of the Patrick and Mary Unstoppable Author Interview Series, where we interview inspiring authors, speakers, coaches, consultants, entrepreneurs from all over the world to help all of us get more time, more money, more freedom, more health, more love, and more happiness in life. Today, strap on your seatbelt, buckle up your shoes. We have an exciting guest with us today. Her name is Lori Crever, and she's author of this book, Protégé Power, a roadmap to mentorship. Before we begin, I'm going to read her. Bio verbatim, and that way you can follow along online as well. Go to protegepower.com. Again, protegepower.com to follow along. So Lori Crever is a lifelong performing artist who has worked for 2 decades inside Fortune 50 company, where she managed an employee engagement program for its internal division. She oversaw a formal mentor program that helps hundreds of people to expand their careers. She constructed a workshop delivering mentoring know-how that reached hundreds of others in major U.S. cities such as San Francisco, New York, Minneapolis, St. Louis. Her methods have been proven effective for mentors and mentees alike and resulted in a triumph career breakthrough. Lori has a degree in communications and theater arts from the University of Minnesota. Go Golden Gophers. She has been an urban charter school board member, introduction to implementing human rights into organizational leadership course instructor, and trainer of corporate social responsibility professionals in Tokyo. When not speaking on workplace issues of engagement and inclusion, Lori performs improvisational comedy and is a frequent participant in poetry and storytelling events. Sorry, I butchered that word there. Again, to follow her along online, go to protegepower.com, protegepower.com. She comes to us today from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Thank you, Lori. How are you doing? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing swell. It is an honor and a delight to be here.
Well, I am thrilled to interview you, and I was trying to remember Tammy Alvarez. Somehow we got connected. So share as we begin how we got connected several weeks ago.
Yeah, through Tammy Alvarez, who is a sought-after career coach, career turnaround artist that is located in Belize, but she and I have something in common. We were networked into with one another. We both are former New Yorkers.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Pavement, doing our thing out in New York. So I bonded easily with her, and I'm a big fan of her work and the book that she produced and is coming out early in the new year.
Yes, I saw your name on the back of her book endorsing that. It was fantastic. But I got to tell you, you don't feel like the typical New Yorker. I can feel your energy, that you're kind, loving, humble, gentle, nice, versus the typical New Yorker maybe is a little bit aggressive and pushy. And my son lived in New York for 3 years after graduating from college, and a whole different life out there. So obviously you're not from New York. You just were there for several years.
Yes, correct. Yes, I grew up on a dirt road in the country. So I mentioned a few different stories in my book, Protégé Power, about how when I landed in New York in my mid-20s, I felt like that fable about the cousins where one is the city mouse and then one is the country mouse, and how, overwhelming it is for the country mouse to visit their family member in the big city.
Wow. Well, I'm thrilled about this interview. And let's get started. Your book, Protégé Power, a roadmap to mentorship. I looked up the word protege and I defined it online. It says a person who is guided and supported by an older person and a more experienced and influential person. I absolutely love that word. Love your book title. Please talk about the inspiration behind writing the book, and where does the book title come from?
The word protege, you are correct, Patrick. It's one that is worth looking up because it's an old word. And perhaps the more contemporary term that we're used to hearing in a business setting for a mentoring relationship is mentee. You have a mentor who's doing the advising, offering insights and support, and the person who is on the receiving end of that and developing themselves is a mentee. But I use those terms pretty interchangeable. So the inspiration for the book is, as you stated in the introduction, I happened to work for 2 decades in international banking, and I loved it. I'm a person of the humanities. My degree is in communications and theater. And the role that I had for our division was running these programs that really enhance the work culture. And one of those programs was a mentor program. And I look back now, I think I was a good match to do that, because what I was doing out in New York City, Patrick, was pursuing acting and working in the music industry. And so when I calmed down and did a career 180, and I suspect people that are hearing this have been in these situations themselves, right? Where you do a dramatic change in your career. I certainly benefited from having managers who were wonderful mentors to help me sort of recalibrate my style so that I would be credible and successful in a large corporate banking, a little more conservative than the music industry environment. So when I started to work with mentees and recruit mentors, I just really put my heart and soul into creating these great matches. And then what I discovered after a year or two was that the mentees that were really catapulting their career as a result of working with a mentor for 12 months, they had an attitude of taking a lot of ownership. So that's where the title comes from, Protégé Power. That it might seem counterintuitive, but if you have a mentor as the protege or mentee, you should be owning and driving the relationship. You applying your horsepower is what is going to net really spectacular results from that mentor.
Well, and it sounds like in my past, people always ask me the difference between coaching and mentoring. And my answer is mentoring you do for free out of the graciousness of your heart, and coaching is what you do for pay. But it sounds like your expertise is you're working within an organization where both the mentor and the mentee are employed by the same corporation. So there's no exchange of monies that are happening. Is that pretty much accurate? And that's where you got the mentorship kind of thing from? Or?
That is correct. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. When you seek a mentor, that is someone, as you state, Patrick, who has an altruistic aim. Another way that we might think of it is this notion of pay it forward. So we had a culture in our division. We were very successful, robust, filled with talented, smart, experienced individuals. So our division head really expected, it was just a culture point, that anybody on his senior leadership team would willingly take on a mentee every year, because that would reflect this pay it forward notion to say, hey, when I was coming up the ranks, people generously helped and advised me, gave me steering, gave me a metaphorical knock upside the head when I was being a screwball, right? We all have blind spots. And so that was a really wonderful way that we over time, because I ran the program for 11 years, ultimately 900 people participated. I ended up always having more willing mentors than mentees, just to really drive at like, wow, people that are willing to mentor, their heart is in it. They really are wanting to be generous. And Patrick, I think there's great space and necessity for paid coaches. I like to think if you are listening to this right now and you want to jazz up your career, but where you're at is you're clueless. You're like, I don't even know what's out there. I'm not even sure where I should begin. On Planet Lori, don't get a mentor. You are not ready for a mentor yet, right? You should get a coach. You should hire someone who will come in with a toolkit and some precision and do some assessments with you and really help you to advance your self-knowledge. I really consider when you get a mentor, you should have a hearty amount of self-knowledge. That's one of my principles is know before you go, have self-knowledge, at least, like, let's say if you're in a job where you've been working on projects, right? And it's just you, this was the job you got out of college, and now it's 11 years later, and you're on a project team, but you're constantly looking over, the cubicle walls, and you're thinking, how come I'm not in sales? I think I would be good at sales. I know our product set. I'm willing to talk to anybody. That might be an instance of finding a mentor who works in sales, right? And who could give you some guidance on what does it take to be successful in selling, right? But you've already got that piece of self-knowledge, little more of a less fuzzy vision, I would say. It doesn't need to be completely ironed out, but to have something of a vision. And I think for a lot of us, that might mean some pre-steps of working with a professional coach.
So when you set this up for different corporations and the companies that you work for,
Right.
Are these mentor-mentee relationships only a 1 year at a time, or is it you assign somebody, and as long as both are, or you match the two, and then as long as they're within the same organization, they can continue on that relationship for several years? Or is it just a 1 year kind of a thing, and then they find a new mentor each and every year?
Yeah. In the program that I operated in my corporate job, as well as the clients I have working with the Center for Mentoring Excellence, they are set up to be 12-month relationships where mentee and mentor are coming together at least once a month, oftentimes 2 times per month. And then at the end of that 12 months, what we hope is that a friendship has formed, and on a less formal basis, that mentor and mentee will stay in touch. I can tell you one of my key mentors that made a tremendous difference in my ability to be effective and successful in my job. Patrick, he's still my mentor. He's visiting the United States right now from London, and we were on the phone a few days ago. I
Wow.
still lean on him. It's sort of like, I think having a good mentor, it makes me think of, is it the mayor in Gotham that turns on the bat light? Right? I mean, if you have a type of mentor where you can turn on your bat light, send them an email or a text or something to just say, gosh, would you have some time for me in the next couple of weeks? I'm at a crossroads and I need to make a decision. I'd love to lay out my options and have you weigh in. That's what a mentor is. It's that person that you trust, that they can weigh in, and their opinion, their lived experience, it's meaningful to you. You still have to make your own decision. You're still the driver of your own career, but to have that outside perspective, someone that cares about you, and also you want a mentor who will be honest with you, right? And help you continue to take more and more responsibility for how you are, how you come across, some of your foibles. And I think that can be truly so powerful, really can make a big difference.
Very good. So stepping back a little bit, how did an inspiring actress in New York end up working for 2 decades in international banking? Tell us about this transition.
Well, no surprise, it was somebody who was an informal mentor to me. There's no way to tell this story without simply stating the truth. I found myself, when I was living in New York, in a brief, not good marriage. And I had a baby, and all factors lined up that pointed the direction to me moving back to where I'm from in Minnesota, and sadly going through a divorce. And as I was going through that, it was becoming more and more obvious to me that I was on my own. A good friend of mine, we had waited tables together during college at the University of Minnesota. She was partway through her MBA, working at a regional bank in Minneapolis, and she took me to lunch with my infant son. He's asleep in the baby carrier. After we're done with our meal, she looks at me and says, Lori, you and that baby of yours need you to get a real job, one with regular hours, good pay, and benefits. And seriously, Patrick, I thought, dang, my parents must have hired her. They're paying her to take me to lunch and just, shake me up. Because
Yeah.
think about it. If someone in my family would have tried that with me, I would have rebelled. I am willing to admit, I'm sad to admit, but I'm willing to admit, I would have rejected it. I would have been like, hey, don't control me. I'm an artist. I'm a free spirit. I'm still going to find something in theater or entertainment. And who knows, Patrick? Maybe I could have. But of course, this friend of mine was right. She's a very honest, direct person. And then she said, Lori, I think you should apply at the bank. And I said, whatever for. Does someone there need tap dance lessons or a beauty makeover? I mean, I don't really see a match here between skills and what a financial institution would be looking for. And then she proceeded to explain, which I did not know at the time. Guess what? There's plenty of creative jobs, even in a financial institution. And she talked to me about branding, design, advertising. She said, we have to have people with your background with a lot of understanding of color and vibe and tone and how to position the brand, because the industry we're in, it's so competitive that we really embrace diversity. So I ended up applying for a communications specialist role, newly created role in world banking. I got hired. And as the saying goes, the rest is history. Patrick, I was sitting literally in a corner office within just a few years. I loved my job. I loved it. I flourished. I had wonderful managers who, as I said earlier, were also very good mentors to me.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So working in employee engagement, you oversaw hundreds of pairings in operating a coaching, mentor-mentee, and job shadowing arrangement. What did you identify as the factors in someone achieving success in these arrangements?
I distill it down to 3 operating principles, and I've mentioned a couple of them so far. One is that the mentee it might feel counterintuitive because traditionally your mentor is going to be someone who is of a higher status, but not always. Sometimes it can be, some people will call it a reverse mentoring. Maybe you'd select someone who's younger than you. So mentee drive the process, know before you go, have already done the excavation work on yourself to know with certainty what are some things in your work life that you prefer? What are some jobs and job responsibilities that you should avoid? Those do not suit you at all, right? So some degree of self-knowledge. And then the last element, which is the most important, it's very easy to say, it is not easy to be this in the world. And that is coachable. You have to be coachable. So that's another thing I say, Patrick. Don't even bother to approach someone to be your mentor unless you are in a space of sufficient vulnerability that you are willing to hear some new ideas, new perspectives. I mean, look at that story that I told. That was positively outrageous, what my friend said to me. Outrageous. I had never worked, not only in a financial institution, I'd never worked in a corporation. I'd never had a full-time job where you get paid vacation time. I was a scrappy artist, doing music and working at the Blue Note in the Village. And I mean, just doing all these eclectic things. Nothing wrong with that. That's part of my tapestry. But I was willing to be coachable. I was willing to give space to a bright idea because I respected my friend.
Very good.
Her opinion carried weight with me. So that's something else I recommend. Even if something seems like, whoa, what? Hey, give it some space, give it some room to breathe. One of my chapters is titled, "You might be one good piece of advice away from the ride of your life." And someone who's not you, just like a good teacher or coach or music conductor, can sometimes see some traits in you that you don't see yet. Give it a chance. What if they're right? They could be right.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I can sense your comedy background with this next mindset. You established a maximum in the book, the everybody's got a unibrow frame of mind. So tell us about this and where did it come from? Because I think that is so funny.
Yeah. All right. So, folks, you're going to have to bear with me. All right. Because this might seem a little bit unfair or uncomfortable, but I promise when I come to the end, it'll come together. So this started with a for real unibrow situation. All right. And then I've just adopted it as a metaphor. And what occurred is we had a magnificent up and comer, very talented individual contributor. And the bosses around this gentleman felt like he had what it takes to continue to be promoted and become a leader and a boss and a manager. So they decided, let's put him in this one-year mentor program that Lori runs, and she'll find him a great mentor. So I found him someone who's a really skillful, experienced, seasoned manager to start developing those managerial skills. This is a true story. Patrick, I can't make this up. 3 months into the program, the mentor calls me up, dead serious, and says, "Lori, may I talk to my mentee about his unibrow?" And I said, "I think you better." What this was about is that the mentor realized every time he met, because they were in the same city with his mentee, the mentor expended 87% of his energy staring at this gentleman's unibrow. And I know you're thinking like, that is super unfair. Wow, how judgy. Wrong. What's wrong with that mentor? Okay, but think about this philosophically. It is a metaphor for the fact that most all of us have one or more traits or behaviors we don't see. Everyone around us is looking at it and distracted. That was kind of the message, was like, it's distracting. And I wish that we didn't judge people by exterior. Wow. I wish that wasn't the case. But there's abundant research on this. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Blink. I mean, our brains make these rapid fire within a nanosecond conclusions, decisions, impressions about someone, fair or not. So the lesson here is know what assets you have, use the assets that you possess for the best result. The mentor sent the mentee to a barber shop that did waxing. This costs, even in a major city in the United States, about $10. It was just a simple grooming tweak. And this is when I learned how many executives in my company practice this type of grooming. Went not just to get a haircut from the barber, but really like take hair out of their ears. I'm serious. No, I mean, real
Nose, ears.
skillful grooming. And it just is so then people are interacting with you as you, zero distractions, and they are receiving well your ideas and your thoughts as you're speaking them. Now, again, I can't make this up. This mentee, within 2 years, had a huge promotion. He ended up leading such a successful team. He was relocated a couple different times, including to countries around the world. Now, is it 100% all we attributed to, oh, whoa, God, he finally got his unibrows sorted out? No. I mean, but that was just like a little sprinkle on the cupcake, right? That was just like, we just needed to do like a little bit. And then the confidence, just like if you do get, you're like, oh, this is a really fine haircut. This looks really nice for the shape of my head and my face. Your confidence goes up. And you can't put a price on that. Don't you think, Patrick? I mean, if you have sincere confidence in your professional self, wow, that's priceless.
I think it's the difference between being underdressed and being dressed for the occasion. Just that little thing alone. So I love it. So what are some other tips for success as someone being coached?
In the mentor-mentee arrangement, when I talk about the mentee drives the process, it can be this simple. As mentee, at the beginning of your arrangement, maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's 12 months, say to your mentor, would it be all right with you for me to set up a recurring meeting on our calendars? And agree to what that is. It's the second Tuesday of every month at 9 a.m. If you're in the same city, you might go to their office, or maybe you commit each month that you'll meet at a cafe or coffee shop. So you're going to set up this recurring meeting, obviously knowing you're going to have to flex and change it here or there if one of you has business travel or some time off. But at least you've got an engine in place now, right? To get that pulse beat going. And then assure your mentor that prior to each meeting, you will open up that instance of the meeting and drop in a simple agenda. Could just be 3 things. Once you get rolling with your mentor, the agenda is what you agreed the prior month to do. So when you're in that meeting with your mentor, presenting your dilemmas, what about this? What about that? I've been an assistant vice president here for 3 years. I think I'm performing at a level of vice president. I want to talk to my manager about getting my next level title. And maybe your mentor gives you some recommendation on how to approach this conversation. You write down what you're going to do between now when you leave and the following month when you come back to see your mentor. Then the day before, a couple days before, you put that in the agenda. You say to your mentor, here's what we're going to be covering. Last month, you gave me some coaching on how to approach my manager about a title promotion. I've done that. I'm going to tell you what happened. You recommended I read the book, The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, or Atomic Habits by James Clear. Like I could, think of all kinds of great books. Reread Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I did that. I'm going to tell you what I learned, and then whatever else is in there, right? And then you hit update that meeting. How easy breezy is the life of your mentor now? You show up, they can already pop open the meeting request and they can see where your head is at and what you want to talk to them about. So they can be their best self. They don't need to be groping in the dark of like, what is going on, or what did we talk about last month? That should not be, because they're doing it as a volunteer, that should not be on their shoulders. That's on your shoulders. You are owning this. You stand to gain the most. And the benefit of doing this, what I found is this makes your mentor like uber abundant in bright ideas and help that they'll give you, because you're making it so easy for them to bring their wisdom and help you. So that's what I mean when I say mentee drives the process. That's what it can look like in the real world. Just that simple.
Love it. Our guest today is Lori Crever. The book is Protégé Power, a roadmap to mentorship. If you want to pick up a copy of this book or follow along online, go to protegepower.com. Again, protegepower.com. Okay, let's shift our lens to the mentor. What suggestions do you have for people who are mentoring to help them to do a great job for their mentee or protege?
A lot of times, a person who is asked to mentor, they've never mentored before. They maybe are unaware how exemplary they are. And so when I encounter someone who's new to mentoring, I say the most important thing for you to do is listen. So many of us, we just yearn for that safe space where we can be honest and have someone listen without, judging us too harshly. So I'd say listen, and then also really strive to get to know your mentee and their capacities. They're not obviously a carbon copy of you. And so sometimes as a mentor, if a person asks for our advice, and this makes perfect sense, our inclination is to tell them to handle the situation how we would handle it. And hey, that might be doable. However, that might not suit the mentee at all. So a pretty simple example would be if you're a male mentor and you have a female mentee, and she comes to you after a few months and says, here's my dilemma. When I'm in meetings, I'm only one of a couple of women around the table, and the men just talk over us. And it's really a struggle to get my voice heard, get our voices heard. It would be not wrong for the male mentor to say, hey, just interrupt, just be aggressive, get in there, right? Because that's what he would do. And guess what? For him, it probably will work just fine. But there is research on both men and women do not like to see an overly aggressive woman. It correlates to being disliked, disinvited. It's not necessarily going to enhance her brand and her credibility. So that's what I mean, where you want to get to know your mentee and say, maybe there's a couple of ideas. You could say in that scenario, hey, gosh, let's think this through together. Because, for me as a male, I would just interrupt and be pretty aggressive, but let's think this through. I don't know if that would really work for you. Let's consider some other options. And maybe the two of you together can Google this and find a white paper. Or, boy, at this point, don't you think, Patrick, there's probably a TED Talk or a TEDx talk that will discuss like really workable strategies for a female professional being able to assert herself without suffering a backlash of people, labeling you something negative.
Yeah, wow. Well, I used to think that the wealthiest place in the world was the cemeteries, because all of this knowledge, goes to the next life, not having been communicated. But what I'm learning from this interview is that a very, very wealthy place is the wisdom, the knowledge, the experience within these corporations and associations that aren't actually passed down yet to their new leaders.
Yeah.
And so I love what you're doing. I love this work. And I think there's obviously a huge need for what you do. So let's discuss culture at work.
Yeah.
For those of our listeners who are leaders, managers, and business owners, what is the relationship between delivering coaching and feedback to your staff and building a positive, effective work culture? Because I think you started leaning towards that culture. How do you do just that?
Yeah. As I was stating, you want to get to know your mentee And some people really prefer direct. Just be direct. Rip off the Band-Aid. Tell me how I screwed up or whatever the thing is. Others require a little more grace and hand-holding. I think it's probably workable to start out with some praise or affirmation. You know, when you have a direct report who's maybe, you know, done something quite annoying and troublesome, and now you just got a call from someone that you need to coach them, is to maybe start by saying, look, you're an amazing member of the team. How you vigorously pursue every problem that a customer throws at us, and you do not stop until you resolve it. Wow, you are one of my strongest players on the team. I'm thrilled that you're here. You set a good example in so many ways. Kind of like that's the frame for your picture. Now, I want to talk through a report I received from the meeting that you were at where you were a bit abrasive. Now, I wasn't there, so I want to hear your side of the story, blah, 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 blah. You know, so you're framing it up in a way that the person is in a safe space, that they feel very confident that they're not going to lose their job. They're not getting into any kind of serious disciplinary situation. But then we want to get people to a spot in a space where they can hear the feedback. And guess what? Some people, you can never get to that space. How sad is that? So that's another thing I really try to espouse in the book, is like, you want to will yourself into being someone who can receive feedback. That's how you want to be. We all need some sandpaper applied from time to time to help us polish off those rough spots, you know? Yes, and there can be culture things too. There's really great work done by the late Geert Hofstad about, you know, the culture wave and understanding like low context, high context. You know, there's ways to go about this. And depending on the nature of your company or corporation, you might have some pretty sophisticated tools in the learning and development area as well. So hopefully what Patrick and I are discussing, it's helping you to whet your appetite to think through like, wow, yeah, between, you know, more seasoned workers and younger generation, like these are all representing different cultures. So it's worth your time to cultivate understanding before you approach feedback, I think, if you want that to be successful.
Very good. So who, as a coach or a guide, has influenced your life and career? You mentioned that man from the UK.
Yeah.
Was that he as your biggest mentor? Were there others? Talk about the influence they've had on your life and your career.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what my mentors have had in common is always approaching giving the difficult feedback with a high dose of affinity, of just being crystal clear. I'm fond of you. I respect you. I'm very invested in you being ever more effective, right? That's like foundational. But then also being direct, just being direct. And the part of the United States that I grew up in, what I just said, it's almost impossible. I mean, we learn how to be obtuse, almost like honorary graduate degree in obtuseness, if that even is such a thing, right? And I think Brene Brown has a really great, easy to remember phrase, which is clear is kind. Clear is kind. And so keeping that in mind, right? I used to be too gushy, too let me just stream of consciousness say everything that's on my mind. And ew, no. I mean, each one of us as we mature has to learn how to do some editing and, you know, read the room and just hear it in your mind first before you blurt it out. It could land really poorly. It could be something to save for a different time. Maybe the timing isn't quite right. We each, I think, have probably inadvertently insulted someone and had no idea how or why. And so that's something too, is just to really be thoughtful and be perhaps a little more willing to use restraint. I think about a very funny quote attributed to Mark Twain, which is, better to keep your mouth shut and be thought a fool than to open it and remove all doubt. That's one, Patrick, that I put into use many times in international banking because I found myself routinely surrounded with such smart, experienced people. And that was kind of my growth and maturity was, Lori, it's okay to be a listener in this conversation. You're not going to earn points by weighing in on things you don't really have knowledge or well-formed opinions yet, right? It's like, we can all have opinions, but do you have an informed opinion? Have you done your homework to really, have that be worthwhile? So I'm glad you're asking about this. These are complex things, but I'm feeling like, yes, we all have encountered this both directions, like said something where you're like, ooh, I didn't mean for it to come out that way. Or you've been on the receiving end of it, right? Where you think, oh, that was really uncomfortable. I really wish I wouldn't have attended this meeting. I feel terrible now.
Yeah. Well, I have a funny story to share that about 30 years ago, when I entered the professional speaking industry, a very senior mentor who spoke exclusively in the financial services industry told me that what I needed to do was to pick my niche, to pick one niche as a speaker and only speak in that niche. And his advice was, well, I only do financial services and I only do the John Hancocks, the Prudentials, the Goldman Sachs. That's all I speak to, just that industry. Patrick, that's what you need to do. And I said, well, that's easy to do if you have a big bank account. But like me, when I'm starting from scratch, my niche is any organization whose check clears my bank account. I mean, that was my niche. And so I didn't accept that information from him, and I didn't take that wisdom. So I want to ask you what piece of advice you didn't take. Do you have one of those that you should, people, if they do recognize years later that they discarded a good piece of advice? So talk about any advice you didn't take, or an example of somebody else that didn't take a bit of advice and it turned out better for them.
I'm so glad that you brought this up. Amen. I'll go back to something I stated earlier. Folks, you remain in the driver's seat of your career. And in a mentor-mentee situation or a coach-coachee, they should be mature enough to easily experience if you think it through and you reject a piece of advice that they give you. You have to use still your own filter and live with the consequences. So the one that comes up for me is more in personal life, but since I already gave some context, this was now more than 20 years ago, but like pretty new single parent, solo parent. I started over time to call myself a uniparent because I was all alone. And that non-custodial parent was in a different state and pretty elusive. So I had a woman I was acquainted with that was in a little bit similar situation, but she like super projected onto me her own thing. And she was just really strong with me on just forget about ever getting child support. Just forget it. Just drop it. And it was so like doomsday and black and white, right? And I'm like, girl, I'll do what I want to do, right? Because regardless, I knew the person that is my child's father and that I was married to is very able. So I stayed with it and collected, right? So I think, like, thank goodness I didn't just blanketly take her advice, right? So I know people, this strikes a note, doesn't it? Oftentimes people say things which really is about them, right? And you have to just kind of weigh it out and go, hold on, is that me? It's kind of like trying on a garment, right? It's like, is that really going to suit me? Is that really me? Is that really going to fit me? Because obviously we have to live with our own consequences of our own decisions. So I love it. Truly, Patrick, I'm so grateful that you brought up this thing about, like, yes, just because you have someone who you're willing to have advise you, it does not mean that you have to take all of their advice all the time. Not at all.
Well, think about like the international game of cricket, which I've never been to a cricket match. And let's say your mentor was like a former cricket player and you were a baseball player, and they try to tell you to take a cricket bat to bat in a baseball game. It's the wrong tool. So the point of it is, not all mentors know all the underlying circumstances, like in the situation that you just described. So I love that. Great, great answer. You were part of a teaching team delivering a prior University of Minnesota course titled Implementing Human Rights into Organizational Leadership. So tell us about your idea concerning human rights in the workplace, because I think that's so very important in today's day and age.
It does remain so very important. So I worked in an international division where ultimately we were operating in 38 countries. And I was a pretty loud voice, ultimately, to having the corporation come up with its first ever human rights statement. And part of this was, naturally, with our employees that work in different countries, they might be encountering things in their community that are different than I might encounter in Minneapolis. And so we wanted to make sure the positive part of our culture, which is that we do respect the law of each country, and within that, the human rights, both the literal law and the spirit of it for citizens around you. So let's say that you are one of our staff in the Philippines, and on your way to work, you observe what looks to you like illegal child labor in a factory. I wanted to make sure as a corporation that we were being explicit with our employees all around the world that we want you to cooperate with law enforcement. You don't need to use vacation time to do that. Or if you are called to testify, right? I mean, there's just so many different permutations. None of us could even imagine all of the different challenges under this category of human rights that might surface for staff. But wanting them to have that freedom and that backing from their company, because we've all had managers and bosses, and sometimes their own perspective is limited. And so it's nice to have some policy that will back you up as the employee, and wanting to help foster leadership and courage. That's really important because, I remember there was a lot of civil unrest in Egypt when I was in my international banking career. We had a rep office in Cairo, and we ended up closing it down. We did our best to help find jobs for that staff that we had there, but it's easy to see what the ramifications are if there's civil unrest, if there's human rights violations, then I don't mean to sound petty, but it will then affect commerce, or your ability to be in that country, transacting and doing business and being part of that community. So it fits together, I think, like an ecosystem.
Very good. So you worked in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging consulting after leaving the banking industry. What are your hopes for equity in the workplace for women, people of color, and other historically marginalized workers?
Yeah. Well, I want all of us to keep going. This is a very complex journey. It's very personal and individual. There's been really great conversation over the last 5+ years about privilege. And the diversity firm that I worked at, our viewpoint was every one of us in some areas has privilege. You know, I was not growing up naturally good at those traditional sports of softball or volleyball. I mean, I just did not have the innate skill for it. If you were like that, it was so intimidating to be around your classmates, boys and girls, who were just like naturally gifted at sports, could just like easily pick up a baseball bat and boom, you know, home run. So in that scenario, somebody who's naturally gifted in athletics has privilege, right? But I was fearless about going on stage and acting in a play. Others would say, oh my gosh, that would freak me out. How do you do that? So just to really be cognizant of, hey, you know, we all have privilege. We all have areas that it seems like things come easy to us. So let me gain some better awareness around what if there's someone around me in the work environment that needs access to that. And what can I do to make sure that they have access to what they need so that they can be more successful? There's some really interesting work, like at Harvard, for instance, around unconscious bias. You could take for free an online exam that will clue you in on what some areas of unconscious bias are that you have, which we all have, not singling anybody out, me as well, right? So I just want to encourage people to whatever that means to you about equity and inclusion to be on that journey yourself, and maybe, you know, take a look at it if you haven't already, the Robin DiAngelo book. You know, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. And, you know, she has a TED Talk and such too. So just expose yourself to it. Let's open up our minds, right? And see what's there to discover.
I love it. I love it. You are a person of the arts, a published poet, involved in competitive high school speech and one-act play festivals, perform with comedy team, the Jesters Comedy Improv. So tell us about the connection you see between the arts and business, because I think people think they're completely two different things, and I love how you're kind of bringing them together.
Yeah. I didn't consciously design my career this way, but I began to see over time that I'm one of those people, and I'm certainly not alone, that enjoys cross-pollinating. I really so many times could see in banking how much my background in humanities and liberal arts was a benefit. I can recall an executive that I was getting to know, very senior person. His slides were 7-point font because they were so dense. Now, coming from an arts, you know, audience analysis perspective, there would be one thing that would get accomplished with that PowerPoint, and that would be putting everyone to sleep. And also changing their calendar the next time that they were invited to a presentation of his. So just, you know, but his data was brilliant. His data was relevant. No question about that, right? So just helping to massage that. But then the other direction is having so much involvement with people in full-time theater and performing arts. Sometimes, not everyone, but some can adopt a pretty arrogant attitude towards business. People in business or finance are just like conservative and boring. And, you know, so then I'm that voice to say, who do you think the season ticket holders are? You know, I mean, that it's, again, it's an ecosystem. We all need each other, and let's do more cross-pollinating. And certainly any arts organization is going to benefit from having people from finance, economics background, a business background, serving on their board of directors can make a big difference to help with tightening a strategy and really thinking through, you know, some more of the marketing challenges on how to identify and find your audience and express your brand. So I embrace it. You know, I used to try to live, can you believe this, Patrick, a secret life? You know, I would like not tell anybody when I was early in my banking career that I was a theater person. But then, I don't know, people started to find out about it. And then I would just run with it. Like I said earlier, I had amazing managers, very supportive, and people have probably heard this phrase before, wanting to encourage people to bring their whole selves to work. Now, maybe not your whole self, right? But enough of yourself, enough of breadth of what you can bring, that would be very constructive for your team and your
Very
organization.
good. So as we conclude, I want to ask you, because I'm fascinated about this concept of you working with corporations, associations, maybe churches, schools, the hospitals, the whole gamut of all these organizations out there. Talk about your target market. What do you do for these companies?
Yeah.
How do you fix culture? How do you improve their company's bottom line? How do you reduce turnover?
Yeah.
So if I were a director of human resource and you were sharing with me what you do and what you can do for my organization, what is your target market and how can you benefit my company? Because we're struggling and we're not hitting our revenue numbers and we got too much turnover and our culture is non-existent. So talk about what you do in your business as an author, as a speaker, as a coach, as a consultant.
Well, as I stated earlier, my affiliation is with the Center for Mentoring Excellence, which has been around for a few decades, founded by a female PhD in adult learning, Dr. Lois Zachary. And we go in and help retain talent. And you touched upon something so important earlier, Patrick. Mentoring is possibly the most economical way to achieve a knowledge transfer from your seasoned, experienced people. How sad it is, as you alluded to, Patrick, to consider how much wisdom and knowledge is in a cemetery, untapped, untouched, unused. Talent is retained through mentoring because the person feels extra cared for. They have a safe person who's a cheerleader for them as well, that they can go to in a routine fashion to get help, support, be a sounding board, right? Partner with them on something, help to stretch them. Many of us feel a little bit lost when we're done with our formal schooling, because when you're in school, you're always getting stretched and exposed to things. And, within the routine of your work life, that may or may not be part of it, right? Depending on if it's a manufacturing environment and everything's working like a well-oiled machine and they don't want to change things. Whereas having a mentor, by its very nature, that relationship is going to broaden you and open you up. It's another way to be very honoring towards your more senior people. And invariably, what we find with the clients that we're working with through the Center for Mentoring Excellence is that the mentors report to us that they get as much or more out of the relationship. So it really invites reflection on the part of that more experienced person as to what they have learned, what they have contributed. So it's really engaging for them as well.
Very good. Very good. So do you offer a complimentary consultation if someone wants to learn more? If so, how can people get a hold of you to book you as a speaker, to work with you as a coach, to hire you as a consultant? How can people get a hold of you to learn more in that regard?
Absolutely. Please email me. My email address is Lori, Lori, at protegepower.com. And I would love to talk with you. I mean, we're working with organizations, including government entities all over the world. And, another area where there's a need for mentoring is in sports. A lot of people who maybe from the age of 3, men and women, have their eyes set on going to the Olympics or being a professional athlete. They really are tunnel vision on that. And most of those athletic careers they're done, right? When you're in your late 20s, maybe early 30s, and strong possibility that you have a lot of working years left. So for example, with the NBA, they have retired players that they will pair with players coming out of the NBA as mentor-mentee to help them make that big transition into, maybe we could call it civilian life, right? And come up with, what are you going to do now that's satisfying to you, soul, brain, right? And also financially remunerative.
Very good. Very good. So our last question that we're going to ask is on unstoppable. But before I do that question, ask that question, are there anything that I missed? Anything else that you want to share? Anything about your book that you want people to know? Anything that we missed about you and your background? Go right ahead.
Well, I will just say that over the years, maybe others have heard this too. Someone will say to me, I'm a visual learner. And I feel like to one degree or another, that's pretty much all of us. So I did want to offer that I have an illustrator, a wonderful illustrator. So my book features over 100 illustrations and diagrams to help bring the concepts to life. So I think that makes it a really fun read, maybe a little different than other career development books.
Absolutely. And I'm looking at these illustrations and they are amazing. In fact, I'd like to get in touch with that person for my other clients. So
I'll
very
hook
good.
you up. I'll make the introductions. I would be honored to.
All right. So our last question, this show is titled The Patrick and Mary Unstoppable Author Interview Series. And the reason is Mary's middle name is Unstoppable. We've given her that name, so we call her MUW. So I want to ask you, Lori, how do you define the word unstoppable?
I consider each and every one of us has an infinity of imagination and bright ideas. And so Patrick, Valerie, Mary, that's what comes to mind for me, is to regard myself and my fellow humans on this journey as having infinite capacity for wisdom and imagination and bright ideas. And what can I do to help draw that out and help the person to honor their ideas?
Very good. Thank you so much. It's been a privilege and a joy. Our guest again today, Lori Crever, the book Protégé Power. Do yourself a favor, whether it's a New Year's gift, Christmas gift, go to Protégé Power, pick up a copy of this amazing piece of work. And Lori, we're going to end the interview recording. Are you able to stick around for Q&A?
You bet.
All right, so let's give Lori a big hand. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. I so appreciate your time.